Welcome to another edition of River City Hardball. I'm your host, Andrew Gibson. Always a pleasure to welcome in my friend Jacob Evanich of Optimized Physical Therapy and Sports Performance. And you've got to know him a lot over the course of the several weeks that we've done this podcast, weeks and months now. We've covered a lot of ground, a lot of topics here on the podcast with you, man. How are you tonight?
I'm doing good, man. Busy days, as you know, as we were talking tonight. It's been busy. Kind of tired, but it's all good. There's a reason why I'm tired, and it's because of the fun work I get to do. So well worth it.
How many clients, how many patients have you seen today? Just give or take today.
Yeah, so I work with a different clientele in the mornings. So I see some people then, and then with baseball players, about four previously to us doing this podcast. So yeah, it's fun, and all different kinds of cases, some sports performance, some like post-op right now we ended up having that we're trying to rehab back. So it's kind of all over the place, and it's fun, but then also prepping the programming, making sure it's individualized for each person. Takes a little time, but it's all worth it. Just fun to see everybody progress over time.
Well, and it's the month of November. Things continue to get busy as we prepare for the 2022 baseball and softball season here in Jacksonville. And by the way, it's the state of Florida, so you can play all year round, which is great as well. Let's get into our topic tonight. It's labral tears. Tell me about a labral tear. What is that exactly?
Yeah, so the labrum in the shoulder is like it's a cartilage ring. So a lot of people know like the meniscus in the knee. A lot of people understand what that is. It's similar to the meniscus in the knee, only it's in the shoulder, and it's just right around the shoulder joint. So just kind of giving like a pretty good visualization. With the shoulder itself, with the glenoid, we have the shoulder blade, which ends up at the end of it is the glenoid. The humerus, the humeral bone, is the inserts into that, and they come together to make up the shoulder joint. And so it's kind of like the glenoid is like the golf tee. The end of the humerus itself is like the golf ball, so they fit together. And then you have that ring around the glenoid to kind of help all those fit together a little bit better, along with the ligaments, capsule, muscles in the shoulder. So all those play a part in helping to stabilize the shoulder. It's just the labrum isn't very big, just because the shoulder does need to be a little bit more mobile than other areas, just because we have to move in all different directions with it. And then with what we'll be talking about tonight, some of the slap tears. So you have the bicep tendon actually comes, one of the bicep muscles, the tendon actually comes all the way up to the top of the glenoid itself. So it attaches into that labrum at the very top. And that's where we can have some of the issues that we'll be talking about.
Is there one specific position, like pitcher, that's more common for a labral tear?
Yeah, anybody can get them, of course, if you're an overhead athlete. So, volleyball, anybody. But pitching would definitely be the number one, just because they are doing it repetitively over and over again. And it's a very high velocity movement. So over time, the more we do it, the more kind of pulling. So the bicep muscle itself actually helps stabilize the shoulder and dissipate some of the forces. So it works. It goes down below the elbow, so it helps with the elbow, but it also goes up into the shoulder, so it crosses two joints. So there gets to be a lot of stress that's placed on that muscle itself as we're throwing. And so over time, an analogy that's a pretty good one is that bicep muscle ends up going into the labrum. And just like when you have a really tough weed or something to get out of your garden, that you have to kind of twist it back and forth and keep pulling at it to get that weed out of the ground. Similar thing with this is when that bicep tendon over and over again, especially when we're going, doing any of the rotations, so external rotation and internal rotation while we're throwing, there can be just constant kind of torsion being placed on that bicep coming into the shoulder. And over time, it can just tear that labrum a little bit.
When we talk about a torn labrum, it sounds very serious. Is that a serious injury?
Yeah, it is. It's pretty tough to the results aren't that great with the studies that they've done for coming back from it. So we will try conservative treatment first, always, to try to see if we can return to play that way. So just doing your typical kind of rehabilitation. Of course, if we don't have surgery, time to come back is a little bit quicker. So we'll do the non-op route first. And if that doesn't work, then that's when we end up considering surgery to repair it. So basically, the doctors will go in there and they'll end up pretty much tying the labrum back down and trying to reinsert it to where it was before. It is tough to come back. Some of the stats that I had was it's a wide range on this, coming from a couple different studies, but about 22 to 60% of overhead athletes return to their prior level of function and play as before. So you're talking about 1 in 5 or 6 out of 10. That's not as high as you would definitely want it to be. And even pitchers coming back, about 62% get back to their previous level, but they also had decreased amount of innings pitched at that point. So always trying to go non-op if we can, and then the operative route if we really need to. But one thing that happens with that operative route is we end up getting the sometimes the joint itself can be tightened a little bit too much. And most times when we have the labral tears, just because part of what causes that external rotation. So when the repair ends up happening, it limits our external rotation again. And we get the majority of our velocity, or a big part of it, comes from the external rotation that we can get. So even if our external rotation is decreased by about 5 to 10 degrees or so, that can significantly limit how fast you can throw.
So when we're talking about rehab for a labral tear, are we talking months, like 5-6 months as far as that goes?
Yeah, so you're going to be in a sling and not moving your arm for a certain period of time. And that's when you're going into rehab to get stretched to make sure things don't tighten down too much. And then as things, based off the healing timelines that we know, then you can start progressing the exercises a little bit more and doing things a little bit more actively. And then, of course, gradually increasing the difficulty of the exercise and trying to eventually get to the point where we're kind of mimicking the throwing motion with some of the exercises we do. By the time we get to about 4.5 months or so, as long as everything's gone as planned, you think that you might be able to start throwing just with the throwing program. And then gradually progressing through that to when we get to about 6 months or so about 6 weeks of throwing without any significant discomfort, then that's when maybe we can get onto the mound and keep progressing from there to fully return. But it all just depends on how the person responds. So if for whatever reason we're having a lot of discomfort at some point in the rehab process, or we're having a problem getting some of the motion back, we stick at that point until we get that done, and then we progress forward. So same thing, like you start throwing at 4.5 months and just not feeling right or feeling good, then we would delay that, and then that just delays your overall time to actually fully return.
Give me one specific, I know you do a lot of different exercises for a rehab on a labral tear, but one specific exercise, what would you do? Like overhead, something overhead as far as lifting?
So for example, early in the rehab process, so there's been studies that actually figure out what exercises specifically cause a muscle to fire the most and really isolate that muscle. So even something like regaining appropriate movement of your shoulder blade after the surgery, so just laying on your belly and doing a row. Most people know what a rowing exercise is, so doing something like that. Or for example, laying on your belly and going out into, like, bringing your arm out to the side, we call it a T, or going a little bit more overhead and going into a Y position to work on, it works the rotator cuff muscles a little bit, but those specifically are big time for the shoulder blade. And then also, say, laying on your side and just rotating your arm out. That one would really get some of the, specifically one of the rotator cuff muscles. So those are what we do early on, just some of those muscles to really isolate.
If you missed our last podcast, we focused on valgus extension overload. How did I do on that, first of all?
Good, man. I think that's 4 for 4 now is what it is. And I'm glad you keep saying it instead of me.
Yeah. Well, if you guys want to check that out, our last one is on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram as well. We put it all there for you guys to check out on any of those platforms. Final thing before we let you go tonight, what's maybe the most important thing people should know about labral tears in the rehab process?
In the rehab process, well, maybe the most important thing is it is important to, maintain your body and maintain especially your mobility during the season, to one thing that increases your risk of having the slap tear is decreased motion of about 5 degrees in external rotation. So in general, that is important to continue to make sure we're keeping our mobility throughout the season, especially as a pitcher, keeping up our body in general. And also, if you are hurt, because I've seen this as well, where, you know, somebody hurts their ankle and then it kind of throws off their mechanics and they try to fight through that ankle injury, but it messes up their pitching mechanics. So then over time, it ends up resulting in a shoulder. So just make sure taking care of yourself. If something is injured, make sure to rehab it back best you can, even if it's not your shoulder, because the mechanics do matter and they take a lot of pressure off the shoulder. So I would say that to me, the biggest thing with the slap tear is try to make sure you don't get a slap tear in the first place. So it would be more the preventative measures, just taking care of yourself, taking care of your body, your mobility, strength, mechanics, and that'll give you the best shot to make sure this doesn't happen, because it is tough to come back from.
Always informative, always great information from our friend Jacob Evanich from Optimized Physical Therapy and Sports Performance. As we mentioned, check him out on Facebook and on Instagram, and each podcast episode is posted to YouTube as well. Man, always great stuff. Appreciate the time tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Gibby.